Hi, this is Gary. In this tutorial I'm going to give you an overview of what polarized ranges are in poker. What we're going to cover is what are they, how do they work, and when or where should we consider using them. To start off, there's the pre-flop polarized range, which consists of something like, say, for example, aces or 7-deuce offsuit. It's polarized, meaning they're either way ahead of your hand or they're way behind your holding. Now we can take this a step further to the river, where an opponent on this specific board right here could either have, let's say, ace-jack suited, which is the nut straight, or they could have a busted heart draw, such as 8-6 of hearts, which I've shown there, and they fired every street, and they're firing the river because they missed, and they're trying to win the pot. So in essence, in this one, they either have the nuts, which is the best possible hand, or something close to the nuts. In this situation, it is the nuts. Or they have air, which I've shown in green. The green means it's positive equity for us to call in that situation, and the red means it's negative equity for us to call in that situation. In this next example, what I have here is a list of possible cards that one can be dealt, and what we're going to do is we're going to construct a polarized range based on pre-flop holdings. As you can see, I've highlighted some possible pre-flop holdings of a polarized range in light green there, and I'm going to circle those in purple. Basically, what a polarized range is that an opponent or yourself has holdings that are polar opposite, meaning they're the absolute strongest hand or the absolute weakest hand, or relatively speaking, strongest hand and weakest hand. So on the left we have our strong range, I've got in red there, and on the right we have our so-called garbage range, or weak holdings. And the question with polarized ranges is always, what is your relative hand strength to that of your opponent? And we got to remember that relative value is going to constantly change on each street. That's what makes the game of poker difficult and challenging. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink this down here, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at when is a good time to use the polarized range. One time to use a good polarized range is against opponents who are able to fold hands in certain situations. Now, the key point here is able to fold hands in certain situations. So they have to be able to fold hands. Another situation to use a polarized range could be check raising on the flop. But for this to work, it has to be against specific opponents that are able to fold air or able to fold marginal hands in certain situations. If it's a calling station, it's not going to work very well. Which brings us to our third point here. This is going to work against thinking opponents. And by thinking opponents, I mean they're able to fold hands, and they can think that you might actually have the monster you're representing. Against a calling station, it's more likely to be a disaster because they're going to call you down with almost anything or any hand that they believe is callable. So against new opponents, you don't want to try using a polarized range. You want to try that against regulars or more sophisticated opponents, and it's read specific and it's opponent specific as far as how how they play the range and how you should play the range. Again, it's typically best to try this against raise or fold type players. Now, on the other side, the question is, when an opponent has a polarized range, what is a good counter strategy? I'm not going to cover every point here, but I'm going to cover a few points, or the key points here. First off, your relative holdings will generally have more average equity. The problem is it's kind of like a barbell. It might not be an evenly shaped barbell. It might be weighted heavily one way or the other, meaning your hand is either worth it's going to win the pot or it's going to lose a pot when you get to like river situations. So you want to make calls read specific and opponent specific, but if you have a good read in certain situations, checking marginal hands on the river and stuff can yield a higher profit if your opponent likes to bet. And just to reiterate, your marginal holdings are either way ahead or they are way behind. Another strategy, which I've seen opponents try against me when I was playing Polarized that seemed to work against me, was they would either bet or check raise, and that would work because it would get me to fold a lot of my air or my garbage out. Now, if my air or garbage turned into the nuts on a monotone board, that could be disastrous if they did not lay down the hand at some point. In closing, what I'd like to reiterate what are the most important elements of being able to decipher when to use a polarized range or not are that first off, you have to be able to put your opponent on a hand at some stage, and you have to accurately be able to put your opponent on a hand. You don't want to be off in your guesses, otherwise it throws everything off. So you also need to know like what your opponent's tendencies are in certain situations, what they will and won't do, so you can narrow down the possibilities or possible holdings they have. In other words, or to sum it up in short words, you want to know where they're at and what they're likely to do in that specific situation, and what your best option is. Otherwise, if you're not familiar with that, you're usually better off playing some type of plain vanilla strategy until you have that figured out. And that concludes our tutorial for polarized ranges. Thank you for watching.